Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thanks for joining us for our program today called Listening to America. Today's event is in partnership with the Bob Woodruff Foundation, and I'd like to thank that foundation for its support today. The Biden-Harris administration has taken office at a particularly challenging moment in the history of the country. The electorate is deeply divided. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to eliminate structural racism, inequities of all sorts, a pandemic that has killed more than 400,000 Americans as we air this, and the number is going higher. The vaccine rollout has been much slower than expected, and the economy continues to be on shaky ground. The challenges are clear and daunting. However, the old adage that all politics is local still applies. The perspectives of constituents, local governments, and jurisdictions have never been more important. So in addition to national issues, what are the concerns of citizens in communities small and large, rural and urban? What do they want the Biden administration to focus on? How do they want Washington to lead, if it will lead? We'll find out from a fantastic lineup of speakers, governors, mayors, community leaders. But before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag The Hill America. That may be the coolest hashtag we've ever had. We're broadcasting live and we'll be taking your questions throughout the program. And if you experience any trouble with the live stream, please refresh the page. They tell me, I don't believe them, but they say that'll be a quick fix. Our first guest is an entrepreneur, an education leader, and a public servant. He started his first business while in college, and by the time he was 30, he'd launched 3 successful companies. During his time in Congress, the Center for Effective Lawmaking ranked him the most effective member of Colorado's House delegation due to his success in working across the aisle to improve Colorado's schools, protect public lands, support startups, and small businesses. He took over as governor of Colorado in 2019. Welcome, Governor Jared Polis. It's great to be with you and talk to you. I've always enjoyed our conversations. But one of the things we're doing right now was inspired by a conversation I had with then Vice President Biden in 2016. He said to me, Steve, we're not listening to the country. The Democrats have become a party of snobs. We're too far away from people and having them understand we hear them and feel their pain. So I want to just ask you, you're a successful politician, governor, businessman. What are we not hearing in Washington now that you think most needs to be heard?
Well, this is a welcome direction, Steve, and thanks for having me on. Certainly, when I was in the United States Congress, I listened closely to our local elected officials, commissioners, mayors, our governor. And I think it's great that those voices are being elevated now with this forum and many others in Washington. Why? Because while the federal government with the pandemic is playing a coordinating role, it's really on the ground in the states, in the cities, where it's playing out, how we're organizing vaccination clinics, how we're surging our medical capacity, how we're implementing social distancing. Of course, it's better now with the Biden administration to have that strong across-the-board support for science-based measures, but it plays out differently in every area, and it's really important to be attentive to the needs of each community.
You know, right now, people feel like this is a moment of reset. I feel like it's a moment of whiplash, that if you watch Washington, the wall has been stopped, the Muslim ban is over, environmental regulations are being reversed, and all of this done by executive order. When you kind of look at this, and you're somebody that I've always looked at that has a solid foot in kind of the pragmatic business world, which has helped inform a lot of this, as you kind of look at these straddles that need to happen in Colorado, but also nationally, so that it's not just whiplash, but that we get something where both sides feel they're, in the equation that matters. What would be some of the things you'd recommend?
Well, in Colorado, we had a special session around a stimulus, and we had Republicans and Democrats really coming together on the measures. It provided tax relief for small businesses, help for food banks, renters assistance, and it passed with overwhelming support from both sides. I'd love to see the same sort of work together on the next stimulus bill in Washington. I think that there's certainly a lot of support for the additional $1,400 payments to folks on both sides of the aisle. But I think there's a lot more that we can find in common when both sides work together to get it done.
In education, which is another key priority, the president has talked a lot about getting kids back in school, particularly K through 8, getting the health guardrails, getting the supplies and money and support to schools that are there. I mean, part of your responsibility, I think, in the state of Colorado is educating children. What do you think we need to do? And in terms, again, hearing those stakeholders in education, what do we need to get right? What would be the blind spots?
Yeah, so I mean, the data is clear that schools and kids going to schools and the work environment for teachers is a relatively low risk environment compared to many other things that are occurring in the pandemic. What we've done is we've created a system of layered protection in our schools, meaning, and we've had a majority of our school districts back this school year. Some are still in the process of they're only back for early grades, but many are back for most grades. It's really about symptom checks. It's about mask wearing. It's about ventilation. It's about distancing. We provided free masks to teachers, medical grade masks if they want them. Many don't. They just want the surgical masks or the cloth masks. If they are worried about the virus, they can wear the highly effective, KN95 mask. So it's really about all of that to make sure that parents and teachers know that compared to other things in the pandemic, in-school learning is a safe environment. Now, that being said, it's not for everybody at this time. And I get it if there's a kid who lives with their grandparents or great-grandparents and they're in their 70s and they're doing everything they can to reduce risk in the final days of the pandemic until they're vaccinated, they might want to continue with online education. And that's an important choice for many families too.
Governor Jared, you've sat in a lot of different positions. And when I was knowing that we were going to have this conversation, but yet I was thinking about January 6th and what happened to the Capitol. And I've interviewed you up in the Capitol before, and I imagine that you thought about being one of those members of Congress that was going to have to deal with who knows what. I guess when you sit now as a governor in such an important state like Colorado and you look at that moment, how does it make you feel? What should Americans that are watching this right now understand about that moment and that tension?
Yeah, I think for anybody in and around the Capitol community and you are, Steve, and my former colleagues, to see the couch from, the speaker's lobby and being wedged against the door. This is the area that every day you go through to vote, how close people got to that floor. In fact, were it not for the brave act of some of the officers, the floor might have been penetrated while the members were there. That was scary. I mean, that was scary. It was a wake-up call. It was extremely upsetting to the entire nation because of what the Capitol symbolizes. But of course, in particular, to those of us including members of the press corps, members of Congress and their staff, who have really worked in those corridors day in and day out.
Is it complicated for you? And I know you're not responsible for what members of the Colorado delegation do or feel are right. I mean, you have your role, they have their roles, but it sort of talks about the great gaps and divides in the nation when you have one representative from Colorado, I think it's Colorado 3, who has been, someone who has been actually charged with helping to incite this, giving tours to folks there, talking about carrying a gun onto the floor of the House. I guess my question, and I hope it's not unfair, is how do we, I also have a place in Colorado. I know a lot of these folks. How do we begin to get something where both sides aren't just trying to spit at each other and they're actually trying to understand each other and move forward in a way that's less toxic?
Colorado is no different than the country as a whole, Steve. We have great divides in our state and in our nation. We have a new congresswoman who unseated a 10-year Republican, Scott Tipton, in a Republican primary and prevailed in the general. And she's making waves from her perspective in Washington. And there's certainly some Coloradans that agree and disagree with what she's been doing. I think it starts with sitting down and listening to one another. I really applaud the work of the Problem Solvers Caucus. I was a member when I was there. I think it's a very productive enterprise. There's other cross-aisle caucuses as well. I think it begins with, just like we try to in broader society, in our families, in our friends network, listen to people with other perspectives. It's really the professional responsibility of our elected officials to do that. Even have those hard conversations, however unpleasant they are, try to understand, listen, and try to find some middle ground that can pull us back together as a country.
Well, thank you for that. I know it's got to be tough for everybody involved in these equations and making them square. President Biden this week said, look, we're going to have 500,000 people dead in this nation from COVID-19 within another month. It's just a staggering thing to hear out loud. And I guess my question to you is, when you think about the disruption that is caused, when you think about businesses and restaurants and other places that are barely surviving or that have been wiped out, and I guess, sometimes we can be in certain parts of the country and, we may be getting our food delivered and things going well, but there's another dimension to this which is so systemic. And I wonder if we're hearing that loudly enough at this moment. And sitting in the governor's office and responding to folks whose lives and businesses have been turned upside down, what do they most need right now?
This is a multi-dimensional tragedy, right? We focus on the health tragedy, and first and foremost, over 410,000 Americans who have died from the deadly virus. We've lost over 4,500 people in Colorado. Secondly, the economic crisis, people who are struggling to put food on the table, who aren't able to work in nightclubs or in restaurants in some states. They're open in Colorado, but in some states during the pandemic. And then beyond that, Steve, it's the social, emotional, psychological crisis, right? It's not just about, for instance, nightclubs as businesses. It's about who went there every night and seeing people. It's about churches with packed pews and our seniors not having that camaraderie at senior homes, about poker night and movie night in the golden years of their life, or being able to simply see their grandkids and extended family. So there's a price across society. Health first and foremost. For the 410,000 people we lost, there is no tomorrow. The jobs will come back, the economy will grow, and yes, state and local and federal government has a role in helping move that along. But we shouldn't underestimate the social, emotional, and psychological toll that this has caused on the American people and the people of the world.
Well, Governor Jared Polis of the great state of Colorado, thank you for helping to anchor this program today as we try to go around to a lot of different corners of America and hear what the priorities are. Thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Steve. Take care.